So open your Bibles if you have them, click on your phone, whatever version you have, whatever you go to Hebrews chapter 1. And just the first two verses this morning I want to read to you, and we want to introduce you to the idea of where the world is going and what's happening in church life. In case you haven't noticed, the church is not the center of community anymore. Have you noticed? Especially the church building with the steeple and the cross on the top. There are not people flocking in North America to the buildings called churches anymore. Unless there's this almost perverse political religious union that happens, where strong political opinion and strong religious opinion unite to eliminate all other strong religious or strong political opinion. When that happens, we're in trouble, by the way. If Jesus had come and set the model for us that we should politically take over the world, then he would have come and he would have displaced the Roman rulers instead of surrendered to them. He would have displaced the priests instead of surrendered to them. So I want to read to you the beginning of a letter to a group of people who had discovered that they were no longer the center of the world. God's people, the Jews, the Hebrews, who suddenly discovered that they had no world and they had no place. They just had God. And this is how the letter opens to them in the Roman Empire in the time of Jesus. Going through long lines of prophets, God has been addressing our ancestors in different ways for centuries. Recently, he spoke to us directly through his Son. And by his Son, God created the world in the beginning, and it will all belong to the Son in the end. This Son perfectly mirrors God and is stamped with God's nature. He holds everything together by what he says. Powerful words. After he finished the sacrifice for the sins, the Son took his honored place high in the heavens, right alongside God, far higher than any angel in rank and rule. Did God ever say to an angel, "You're my son, today I celebrate you"? Or did he say, "I'm his father, he's my son"? When he presents his honored Son to the world, he says, all angels must worship him. So for the sake of time, I'm going to invite you to read the rest of Hebrews chapter 1 and chapter 2 up to verse 4 yourself. You ever read it? Recently? Read it again. And I want to talk to you today about being a group of people grafted into this Hebrew culture, these Hebrew people. We are grafted into them. You know what that means? It's like a guy who makes an apple tree, makes a slice in the apple tree. He's got Macintosh there and he wants something else, and he brings another branch of another part of another apple tree and he grafts it in and he binds it up and he covers it with tar, and then he waits and that branch starts to grow and bud and bear fruit. And now you have Macintosh on this side and you have PC on this side. It's a computer joke. Come on. We are grafted in. We are as different from Jewish culture and people as you could possibly be. We are Gentiles. We were allowed at times to become become God-fearers, allowed to stand in the balcony and at the back of the synagogues, but we were never quite allowed in until Jesus Christ. And now we're in. But my question is, what are we grafted into? Are we grafted into a powerful political state of Israel? Are we grafted into a movement that we get Jerusalem in the end and we win? The funny part is, we're grafted into a people that are in exile. And up until 1948, they didn't even have a country. They have no central temple. It was torn down by the God that they worship. We're grafted into a strange relationship with God and His people, and now we find ourselves also a people in exile. We are no longer the center of Canada where the church steeples popped up all over the place. On the way from Westport to this church, I pass at least 6 closed churches that have been turned into Masonic Lodge or Orange Hall or something. Or a house. Closed. We are no longer at the center of the culture that we live in. At one point, Toronto was called Toronto the Good. When they launched missionaries out of Toronto to the world at the Union train station to go out to the coast to get a boat and go to Africa, there were thousands and thousands of people would show up and send the missionaries off out into the world. Now when a missionary goes to Africa, they get on their Facebook account and say, I'm going to Africa. People send them all little notes. They have a GoFundMe campaign and they raise money. And the person goes to the station, to the airport, they get on a plane. They'll be lucky if their family and 10 friends are there to send them off into the world. We are people, technically, in exile. What does that mean to us? In the first chapter of Hebrews, there's a warning that says we must know who we believe in, and we must cling to that as we live our lives in exile. Remember Daniel in the lion's den? We love to tell the story, right? Daniel in the lion's den, and the king throws him into the lion's den, and the lion's mouths are closed up, and God is really good, and Daniel come out, and everything's all okay. But how many of you would volunteer to do what caused Daniel to get thrown into the lion's den in the first place? Not bow down to the power of the day, not pray to ungodly gods, not get involved in the culture that you are placed in to the point where you lose your faith. As soon as we start to assert ourselves, to claim that we belong to Jesus Christ, we automatically become aware that we are now counter to the culture that we live in. A few years ago, a group of us started in Ottawa, an embassy. And the embassy was for ambassadors, right? From other kingdoms. Do you know what the embassy was? It was the Christian embassy. The embassy of the King of the universe. And at that embassy we have ambassadors from Jesus Christ to Ottawa. And in a very funny twist, they actually recognize that there's a Christian embassy. And it also becomes a shelter in a culture that doesn't like God very much, where Christian MPs could go and find a little piece of their home territory that belongs to Jesus. That's kind of like this church, right? And it should be like your house. Pocketed all around Smith Falls are little places where we live in counterculture relationship to the world that we live in because we belong to Jesus Christ. What does it mean for you to be in exile with Jesus? We're grafted into a faith. We're grafted into a family, and we're grafted into a counterculture, and we're grafted into a community, but we're grafted into a restless faith. Have you noticed? Christianity is like a movement, like waves. As soon as you start to try and nail it down, I'm Pentecostal. There's somebody over here going, I'm not Pentecostal. I'm Free Methodist. Well, I'm just Methodist, and I'm free. What does that mean? 2,000 years ago, the letter to the Hebrews said, know who Jesus is, know who you cling to, and get over your restlessness, because you are a people in exile. Every single one of you who know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior are going home to a place where you have never been. That's pretty weird, isn't it? You think you're going to leave this church and go home to your house and be at home, and you will not. You're only going home to a little ambassador's embassy place temporarily until he calls you home. When Sandy and I build a house, and we buy land and build a house and we move in, there's two things that happen. One is I never finish the house because every time I finish the trim or something, it seems like we have to move. The other is we put the house up for sale in our head and in our heart in case Jesus calls us to move. Because we know we're part of a people in exile. We're called into a family that is struggling to understand itself. In case you haven't noticed, Christians all around the world are trying to figure out what it means to be family. There's people trying to redefine marriage and sort out their gender and walk through all sorts of confusing issues. We are grafted into a people that are having trouble figuring out what it means to be family. And Jesus says, when he prays in the garden and he prays to his Father, he says, Father, thanks for the ones you've given me. I want them to be in me as I am in you, so that we can be one, and that's family. I am totally convinced that in all the confusion of gender and everything else that's going on in the world, that Jesus is fully capable of finding the person he made in there somewhere. He will find them. Don't despair. And he will draw them to himself, no matter what the outward expression is. And he will be able to love them and bring them into himself the same way he did with me and you. And we will be one with him and we'll be family. We don't know what that looks like yet. And I'm not by any stretch of the imagination condoning sin or tearing down holiness. I am just surrendering the entire discussion into the one's hands who understand what family is. Does Jesus know what it means to be in exile? Absolutely. He's on the cross. All God, all man, hanging on the cross. What happens in heaven is his Father does this. He goes, I cannot look. I cannot listen. Jesus goes, why have you forsaken me? Why have you placed me in exile? I have placed you in exile so that when I bring you out of exile, the people who remain in exile will understand that they have hope in Jesus Christ. It's pretty cool, isn't it? I think it is. Of all the people that should know how to care, it should be us. Israel was judged, by the way, by how they looked after strangers in their midst. How the people in exile actually looked after the more exiled. Now, can I ask you a question? In Canada, how are we doing looking after the exiles as exiled people? Not that great, are we? We need to find ways to do it better. I'm excited by what's going on because the world's getting smaller. We got an email this week from a lady in Los Angeles who wants to build shelters for the homeless, and she's asking us, can we help? And I'm going, yes we can. And so you have two Free Methodist pastors who own a business that may soon be launching little homeless shelters to Los Angeles of all places. At the same time, I get an email from the United Church minister who goes, is there enough of a heart in Smith Falls to care for the homeless? Can we feed them? Can we build infrastructure? Can we do something? And I'm going, this is a very small world we live in. And the neat part is that the exiles, us, the weird exiled people that don't have a home here but we live here, are the ones who are being called to influence the world this way. So Jeremiah, when he's a prophet, he goes, you're in exile, you're going into exile. Jeremiah is one of my favorite guys. He's really cool. He has a scribe that comes and writes everything down that God says. And so the scribe follows him, and Jeremiah's going, yes, Lord, I got it. He says to the scribe, take a memo. And so the scribe faithfully writes down everything that God said to Jeremiah. But Jeremiah is really smart. He knows that the king is not a very nice guy. So he goes, oh, by the way, scribe, we're going to take this and read it to the king, what God said. Scribe goes, great, and he's about to hand the book to Jeremiah, and Jeremiah goes, oh no, by the way, I'm busy that day. I'm going golfing or something. I don't know what Jeremiah was doing, but he goes, you go down and read it to the king. That's kind of like the way the world is changing in church. Church is not going to be God speaking to the pastor, and the pastor going out and reading the letter to the king that isn't very nice. It's going to be us, you and us, doing that together. As you know the story, maybe Jeremiah ends up going into exile with the people, and we never hear from him again. And we never hear from the scribe again. But Jeremiah says to the people, marry into the community, build families, build homes, because as you prosper, they will prosper. As you are blessed, they will be blessed. And I believe that's what God does with the church. As He scatters you throughout Smith Falls and the region and blesses you, regardless of the circumstance you're walking through, He still blesses us. Your neighbors are being blessed. Your friends, your family are being blessed. So I want to encourage you. This is the Jesus that we believe in out of Hebrews 1. In Hebrews 1 at the very beginning it says, Jesus made the world. Remember the creation story? This world and you are made by Jesus Christ. It also says at the end of all things, He will own it. We're arguing about creation these days, but we're not arguing about the end. Did you know that He will own everything in the end? The end of the creation story is He owns it. We don't need to worry about the middle part too much. Evolution, discussion, and all that stuff. So I want to encourage you that as a church, and as the world gets tougher and as news gets worse and worse, which it will, we still worship Jesus Christ. And He still owns everything. If you're interested, read a book, The Church in Exile by Lee Beach. It will prepare your heart for the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks of sermons out of Hebrews. You can buy it online, or you can get it somewhere, or you can even borrow my copy if you give it back to me. Are you stirred? Curious? So I'm inviting you to get engaged in the world as exiles. Take your story, your everyday story, because that's what Hebrews says. Take your everyday life and give it back to Him. Live it for Him. And tell your story wherever you get a chance. Let's just bow our heads. Father, this morning, we want to be a church that's known as a caring church. Not because it's trendy. We want to be known as a caring church because you care for us. And we want this world to know Jesus. And as we approach this world in love, in spite of the fact that they don't like what we're called Christians, they will discover that they like you or they hate you. Either way, we are still going to love them to death. So give us courage. Give us ideas. Give us confidence. Give us an eagerness to tell our story. Give us gifting that we need. Give us everything that we need to care for the world around us and the people in it. And we will give you the glory. Because this is your story unfolding. Bless us, I pray in Jesus' name.